What's going on, everybody? Cleopas Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some reasons why you might not want the Cricut Ovation 3. Now keep in mind, as always with these videos, some things I'm going to be talking about aren't really that big a deal, and a lot of them are really just some of the minor drawbacks you get with a phone like this. But that being said, if you're trying to decide between getting a more affordable phone like this and maybe spending a little bit more and getting something slightly higher end, then these are definitely some things you're going to want to think about. Now as always, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So my first reason why you might not want the Cricut Ovation 3 is the battery size. Now with this phone, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 10 watt fast charging. So on one hand, it's definitely not bad by any means. In fact, for only having a 4000 mAh battery, the battery life you get with this phone is actually pretty good. But that being said, if the battery is really a main priority for you, if you're really looking for something that's gonna last all day throughout heavy use, or maybe even multiple days, then while the battery on this phone is pretty decent for what it is, it's definitely not the best you can get. So if the battery is really a main priority for you, then you might want to look into something like the Motorola Moto G Power, for example, that has a 5000 mAh battery instead. My second reason why you might not want the Cricut Ovation 3 is the storage. Now this is probably the worst thing about this phone, because at 32GB of internal storage, it's definitely not great. Sure, maybe 10 years ago, 32GB may have been at least decent, but in this day and age, with stuff like apps, the system, and just files in general getting larger and larger, even though to be fair, this phone does at least have microSD card expansion, it's really only going to help so much, because 32GB is just not a lot of internal storage. So if you're planning on downloading a lot of apps, games, stuff like that, then I would definitely recommend looking at a device that has more storage than this. My third reason why you might not want the Cricut Ovation 3 is the long-term software support. Now with this phone, on one hand, we are getting Android 12, which is at least decently newer, so that is at least good, because a lot of phones in this price range, for whatever reason, only have Android 11. But that being said, keep in mind, considering this is a really low-end Cricut branded phone, I wouldn't expect to get any major updates. And this is really one of those things that comes with phones in this price range, because typically, the more entry-level phones don't have the best software support. So if you want Android 13, and maybe you want to get some updates in the future as well, in that case, this is probably not going to be the phone for you. And for that matter, if having the latest software is really important to you, I would probably go for something a little bit higher end in general. Now the fourth reason why you might not want the Cricut Ovation 3 is because it doesn't have stereo audio. Now whether or not this is actually a big deal to you really depends on how you consume content. On one hand, if you use headphones all the time and you're not really playing anything out loud, then you most likely won't even care at all. But if you do like to play things on your speaker from time to time, then just keep in mind, unfortunately, the Cricut Ovation 3 does not have stereo audio. So when you're doing something like watching a video, for example, the sound is only going to be coming out of the main speaker. And in addition to this, in my opinion, the quality of the speaker on this phone really just isn't the best. So again, in general, if you are doing stuff like watching videos, playing games, or maybe listening to music out loud, definitely don't expect to get the greatest speaker quality from this phone. My fifth reason why you might not want the Cricut Ovation 3 is the rather bulky design. Now there are really two sides to this. On one hand, at 6.82 inches, we are getting a really large display here. So if you're doing stuff like watching videos, for example, this is going to be a really good thing. But that being said, the drawback here is that having such a large display combined with slightly thicker bezels is going to make the phone in general pretty bulky. And since it does have kind of cheap materials here, I normally would recommend pairing it up with a case. But when you put a case on a phone like this, it is going to be pretty large. And if you have small pockets, for example, that could make things pretty inconvenient. So in general, if you do want something a little bit more compact, then the Cricut Ovation 3 might not be the best choice. My sixth reason why you might not want the Cricut Ovation 3 is because it doesn't have 5G connectivity. Now on one hand, considering this is a $120 phone, I wasn't really expecting it, but in this day and age, although you can easily get by without 5G, I feel like if you're going through the trouble of getting a new phone anyway, you might as well get a 5G phone. And while there was a time when 5G phones were a lot pricier, at this point at the end of 2022, especially with the deals Cricut's offering, you can definitely get one for a pretty reasonable price. So if you are looking for a phone that you're actually going to keep for the long term, although again, 4G is really not going anywhere anytime soon, and you can get by perfectly fine with it, if you actually are going to keep your phone for a while, I do recommend getting a 5G phone just so you can kind of future-proof things. And finally, the seventh reason why you might not want the Cricut Ovation 3 is the bloatware. Now honestly, this really goes for any Cricut branded phone, but keep in mind, with this phone, there are going to be lots of stock apps installed, like for example this, and whatever this is. And the annoying thing about these apps is that first of all, they are going to send you notifications, which in my opinion is definitely not a good thing. And on one hand, you can turn them off pretty easily, but it's still kind of inconvenient inconvenient to have to do it. The other thing about the bloatware is that, again, with only 32GB of internal storage, this phone really doesn't have a whole lot of space, and with that kind of thing taking up space already, depending on which apps you actually normally use, it might make it harder to get all of them on the phone. And because of this, in general, the setup process here is going to be a little bit more cumbersome. Now, at the end of the day, this isn't really that big a deal, but it still is something to think about because it can make things a little inconvenient. But those were my reasons why you might not want the Cricut Ovation 3. In general, despite a few drawbacks, if you're looking for a really affordable phone for more basic activities that has a great display, a pretty good camera, and decent performance, then I do think the Cricut Ovation 3 is definitely worth considering. Now again, if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Cleepus Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.